Welcome to CivilNet. My guest via Skype from Istanbul is Andrew Finkel of P24, Platform for Independent Journalism. And we will be speaking with Andrew today about the events that are taking place in Turkey for our weekly Turkey Roundup. Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
My great pleasure.
Well, I've been following the news to see what has been going on, and it seems that Turkey is like Armenia in the sense that in the summertime, things start to wind down a little bit, but there are still things that are taking place that are of interest. The Wall Street Journal a few days ago published a piece about Turkey's role and the rise of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. We spoke about this last week following the Mosul attacks, where much of the northern part of Iraq had come under the control of these Islamic militants, the ISIS. Tell me, according to the journal, they're saying that while Turkey is now saying that they will be strengthening the border to prevent these Islamic militants from entering Syria and Iraq, it is saying that it's really not happening, and that the crisis that is taking place today in the Middle East is inextricably linked to Turkey's policies. What is the media in Istanbul and Turkey saying about that?
Well, at the moment, they're not saying that much, I have to say. And one of the reasons is that in the initial ISIS attacks, there were a great number of Turks taken hostages, including diplomats and truck drivers. And the state broadcasting authority imposed a ban on coverage of that hostage crisis, or at least it's not a crisis because it's not in the news. So there's not a great deal of in-depth analysis of what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis on the other side of Turkey's border. I mean, as you say, the ISIS made great military advances, taking Mosul. This provided an opportunity for the Kurds of northern Iraqi, the administration there, to take care of Kurds. Now, Turkey seems relatively happy with that. They've done a sort of, over the last decade or so, they've done a really 180-degree turn from being very fearful of having an irredentist Kurdish state on their border to being quite happy to have a clientelist Kurdish state or Kurdish entity on their border. And of course, the question remains as to what role Turkey has had in the rise of ISIS, whether they supported, the enemy of my enemy, i.e. someone who act against Assad, regardless of the consequences, much in the way perhaps that America supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and ended up with the Taliban. So that question has yet to be resolved, whether Turkey has shut the barn, whether they've shut the barn door too late after the horse has bolted, whether they've shut the barn door at all is something we just don't know.
Right. Okay, because we spoke at length about this last week and there really isn't much more news to report about this situation, I want to talk about what happened yesterday, June 26. The Turkish government submitted a bill to Parliament to create a legal framework for a new set of peace talks with Kurdish militants. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, well, there's two important things to remember here. One is that although, as you say, it's a quiet time in Turkey, it's a hot June day, and it's going to get, well, who knows if it'll get hotter, but things do tend to quiet down, especially as tonight is the first night of Ramadan, and people will be fasting during the whole day for the next month. So you won't really expect all that much to be going on. On the other hand, on the 10th of August is a presidential election, and that's very important to the future of Tayyip Erdogan, who has not yet announced his candidacy, but probably will. Now, in order for him to win on the first round, and even for him to win, especially for him to win on the second round, if he doesn't win on the first round, he needs the votes of Turkey's Kurds. So at the moment, the more hardline, more nationalist Kurds are basically trying to leverage their vote in that presidential election to extract the maximum political advantage that they can. They see this as a historical opportunity to establish some degree, greater degree of autonomy and some sort of privileges for their now imprisoned leader, Abdullah Öcalan. The government is trying to make signals to this Kurdish population that it's about to make political concessions, although there's a great deal of skepticism about what sort of concessions they can make.
I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second. I was reading also that two recent opinion polls, because some are saying that Erdogan really might not even need the Kurdish vote, because according to recent opinion polls or surveys, he has about 55% of an approval rating, taking into consideration everything that's been happening, starting from the corruption scandals. It's interesting. How is it that he's still being able to maintain that kind of percentage in the polls? Well,
part of the thing is, and as as the saying goes, a week is a long time in politics, and 5 weeks is even longer. So yes, he's 55% ahead in the polls now, but what will be the case in the 10th of August, he doesn't know, and we can't know. One of the reasons he's ahead is that the two main opposition parties, the Social Democrat, what the Republican People's Party, the sort of vaguely Social Democratic Party, and the more nationalist, the National Action Party, have agreed on a candidate. Now, the candidate that they've agreed upon he's a very elegant, sophisticated, clever man. Ekmelettin İhsanoğlu is his name, very difficult to pronounce. Most Turks don't even know who he is. So, when given the choice between Tayyip Erdogan, who's been a fixture in their lives for the last decade, and this unknown, of course, we know that that's what the polls are showing. But of course, Mr. İhsanoğlu, who was a former head of the Islamic Conference Organization, who is really acceptable to, to a natural Erdogan supporter. A natural Erdogan supporter could vote for this man without feeling they betrayed their principles. So if he manages to introduce himself to the Turkish public in the next 5 weeks, if he can get through this sort of stranglehold which the government has over the media, then then he has a chance, and the difference between 55% and 49% is not that great.
That's right, because again, I can't remember which newspaper I was reading an article in about İhsanoğlu, saying because he's an unknown figure for most Turkish citizens, and taking into consideration the media stranglehold, as you said. How media is going to be covering the elections, whether they're going to be objective, whether he's going to get enough airtime is also a big question to be able to take over or, garner enough votes to be a contender for the presidency.
I think my simple rule of thumb here is that İhsanoğlu can't win the election, but Erdogan can lose it. In other words, if something happens within the next 5 or 6 weeks, which damages the credibility of Tayyip Erdogan, then people will not vote, will not willingly vote for an alternative, but they'll say, well, at least this man will just be a figurehead. He won't be this sort of aggressive, executive, ambitious president, which Tayyip Erdogan has promised that he will be. So it's his to lose, not İhsanoğlu's to win.
Right, right. Something that's of an interest to Armenians and I suspect also to Turkish society is a recent academic paper or article that was published in the Turkish Policy Quarterly by Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, where he spoke about something called an unjust memory, and it had to do obviously with Armenian-Turkey relations, with the Armenian genocide, and he was basically alluding to the fact that because so much of our history is centered on the events, as he calls them, of 1915, and this is unjust, and this has served as an impediment to creating future positive, good neighborly relations with Armenia. And the one thing that really struck me, Andrew, in his paper was this one line when he talks about, we also spoke about this on April 23, Prime Minister Erdogan issued a sort of a letter of condolence to the Armenian people where he alluded again to the events of 1915, to the Armenian genocide without actually saying it. which was seen as a positive step forward by some in Turkey and by some in Armenia and in the diaspora. But when he spoke about Erdogan's message, he said that this should not be seen as a prelude, this should be seen, excuse me, as a prelude for transformation of minds and memories. Now, this was interesting to me when he talks about transformation of memories. It's like how after the establishment of the Turkish Republic, the Ottoman alphabet was changed. It's almost as if they're trying to wipe out that Ottoman history and saying, okay, let's forget the past and let's think about the future. Well, that's all fine and good, but how do you move forward when there has been such a tragedy or catastrophe as the Armenian genocide?
Well, of course, the Turkish government is incredibly aware that next year is the centennial of 1915 of the genocide, or as Turkey calls it, the events, and therefore is very determined that this should not be a political embarrassment. There's a great deal of effort being put into the fact of trying to sort of smooth through these events, and I think we can see Davutoglu's article in that context. Now, what Turkey's strategy can be in this case is a little bit complex, I suppose. I mean, what they are prepared to do is to go to the brink and say, yes, what happened was unfortunate. They, on April 23rd of this year, they offered condolences, almost an apology, but something that one would not have imagined happening 5 years ago or 10 years ago. But of course, what they can't do is mention the word genocide. So, they're saying, well, look, we're making this huge effort to come to terms with this. You have to bear with us that we're not going to mention the word genocide. Therefore, let's move on. But of course, this isn't, as you say, satisfactory to most Armenians. And so then the government strategy is to sort of say, well, look, if it were up to the diaspora will never be satisfied because they're not really interested in relations with Turkey. They're interested in some sort of vengeful memory and recognition, whereas the people of Armenia itself are much more reasonable because they understand the geopolitics of the situation. And so it's good Armenians and bad Armenians, diaspora bad, Armenia itself good. And of course the reason Armenia is regarded as good is because they have a very strong, strategic interest in reopening the border with Turkey and getting on with Turkey, and yet at the same time, of course, Turkish relations with Armenia are subject to yet another priority, which is the leverage of cheap energy from Azerbaijan. So, the whole thing is complex. And Davutoglu is trying to sort of weave and appear statesmanlike in this very messy conundrum. And of course, ultimately, he probably convinces no one.
Yeah, it seems our region is a messy conundrum, as you said it. Andrew, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out to talk to us again this week about what's been taking place in Turkey and the region. And I'd like to remind our viewers that we spoke about today the rising tension and conflict, the danger of the rise of Islamic movements in the Middle East with ISIS and Turkey's role, and Turkey's policy in Syria and Iraq. We spoke about a new initiative brought by the Turkish government to their parliament to start a new round of peace talks with Kurdish militants. And we also spoke about Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu's academic paper talking about the Armenian genocide. So, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching us on CivilNet.